Hey, all, welcome to ShareTreck. It's the 2nd of April 2022 and a Saturday. So therefore we have our Saturday special edition. And I'm getting more and more comfortable with this software and our video recordings. I've still not been able to fix a very glaring problem. The camera seems to show me as left-handed, whereas I'm actually right-handed. So I'll fix that someday. It's not a priority right now. But my gestures and all seem very different to me when I look at the recordings. So what's the topic for today? The topic for today is going to be what's the fallout of the CRISPR IP verdict, and how is the industry reacting to it? And for us as investor, what does it mean? So let's get started. So let's have a very quick recap. I have done 2 videos so far on CRISPR IP. One was done much earlier in the early days of this channel, and another was done subsequently somewhere around the beginning of March when the IP verdict was announced. So I'll put the links to both of them in the description below, and you could have a look at it for more details. But here is a quick recap. So 2012 seems to have been a momentous year, where there were 2 teams. One is the CVC team, and another team is in University of Lithuania, Vilnius University. And both teams demonstrated almost at the same time that they could reprogram Cas9 to target a site of their choosing by changing the sequence of the cRNA. So that was the innovation that they came up with in 2012, and you can see the intensity of the research that many people were able to demonstrate the same thing at the same time. Around Q4 of 2012, 2 private companies, Toolgen and Sigma. Sigma is, I think, subsidiary of Merck. Those 2 companies filed for intellectual property for CRISPR's use in eukaryotes. So this is in Q4 of 2012. And if we continue further with our recap, this is another slide that I had presented at that time. So around October 2021, CVC, which is the Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier group, they filed for CRISPR-Cas9 patent with CVC just a few months before Broad Institute. Broad Institute filed their IP applications around December 12, 2012. So they were neck to neck out there, but CVC was the first one to file. But CVC's filing was more open, whereas Broad Institute was more specific, and it was focused on eukaryotes. So that is where we were. And then what we had was on February 28, US Patent Office ruled that Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard will retain its intellectual property over the use of CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing in eukaryotes, whereas the University of California, University of Vienna, the CVC group basically maintained their original patent over the use of CRISPR-Cas9 to edit genes in vitro and in prokaryotes. So it was more specific. And as you can see, the CVC group doesn't have much of a domain on eukaryotes. So now I have a slide for you about the difference between eukaryotes and prokaryotes. Just have a look at this. I'm not a biologist, so I have sourced this from another place. So this is the kind of diagrams we have. And diagrammatically also we can see that there are 2 entirely distinct ones. When you talk about eukaryotes, their nucleus has got a membrane around it, whereas in case of prokaryotes, there is no membrane as such. And eukaryotes are basically humans, plants, animals, whereas prokaryotes are unicellular organisms like bacteria. So as you can see, there is more of a scope in the eukaryote side from a business perspective. And in a human body, you can still have prokaryotes. We have them in our digestive tract. So that's the general lay of the land. So it seems that the institution that has got IP domain for CRISPR over eukaryotes has got much better prospects. And before we go any further, let us not forget that we still have 2 parties whose claims have not been reported on, that is Toolgen and Sigma. They have interference application for CRISPR-Cas9 that was filed much earlier and it has not been spoken about by the US Patent Office. So we still need to wait for what's going to happen to them. So this makes the scenario much more complicated, and it is still murky. So that brings us to the question of what now? So what has happened since then? Almost nothing seems to have happened after the IP verdict, which came recently. And there has been a lull in CRISPR news as the news media machinery is focused more on the Ukraine-Russia crisis, while the financial media is focused on inverted curve, inflation, and interest rate hikes. So I score the net on a daily basis to bring to you CRISPR news, but I'm not finding much of pickings. It's very slim. So, however, if we zoom out of this and look at the situation at a high level, it seems apparent that despite any cost that may have to be paid to legitimize the IP before bringing the IP-based products to market, the earnings from such product will have to more than pay for the cost. And that's most likely to happen because many of the treatments that are coming out are very much in demand, and they are going to give significant quality of life improvement for patients, for which they would be willing to pay the price, and also the governments will be willing to subsidize. And once we have economies of scales, it'll all fall into place. That is my opinion at a very high level. And on a more practical note, let us examine where Editas is. This is the company which is on the right side of the IP at present. And it seems that only one patient out of 4 treated with their middle dose of Editas 101 showed meaningful improvements across multiple areas of functional vision. So what Editas had done was it started with multiple doses. It gave the bare minimum dose needed for any reaction to the first batch of people. And so we have a middle dose where Editas showed some improvement. That's only 1 in 4 patients have shown any meaningful functional improvement in vision. And that's not very significant. And if you look at the competitors of Editas, most of the leading genomic companies are in hemoglobinopathies, which is genetic disorders related to blood. And at this point of time, CRISPR Therapeutics and Vertex are in the process of submitting their biologics license application, which is called BLA. The BLA is a request to distribute biologic kit across states so that research can be done on clinical research can be done in the trials. It is generally submitted after an IND or investigational device exemption or investigational new drug application is done, and appropriate studies have been conducted, which means that both Editas is not only lagging behind in the treatment of blindness because of the 1 in 4 results that it has got so far, but also in hemoglobinopathies, it's behind the leaders in the curve. So in this regard, I would point you to a very interesting articles in Seeking Alpha by Bashar Isa. You should read that article. It talks about Editas and how it is doing with regard to vision-related therapies. I'm going to put the link in the description below. It doesn't make sense for me to replicate that topic verbatim out here. We can save time. You look at it at your own free time. But that's a very interesting article that you should see. So basically what is happening here is that people who are on the wrong side of the IP verdict are making great progress, like sickle cell therapy is at the very forefront, and CRISPR with Vertex as well as Beam are in the forefront out there, ready to come up with something because they're all in clinical trials and they are all in the BLA stage. And whereas Editas doesn't have that kind of pipeline in hemoglobinopathies. So that's one problem. On the other side, though Editas is on the right side of the IP, they don't have much to go for in terms of coming to monetization. So now where does that take us? So that brings me to state my opinion. In my opinion, I believe that the lawyers will work out the IP battles while the scientists will advance therapies. It will be the job of the CEOs of various genomic companies to look at their balance sheets, to look at their pipelines, to look at the pipeline candidate and how close they are to monetization and what are the risk factors. And if monetized, what is the size of the market? And then try to determine what is their negotiation position in terms of how much they will be willing to pay for remediating their IP if they are on the wrong side, and see if it is viable for them, if they can still continue as a viable business organization after making that deal. So that is where we need to have companies which have got great CEOs who not only have scientific acumen but also have business acumen and have got a good understanding of how to optimize their IP costs. So that is one of the things that will happen. And the result of that kind of investigation by the CEOs, especially when they come closer to monetization, will be that they will take a different path. If they have sufficient money in their balance sheet, and if they're able to negotiate an IP within the constraints of the budget that they have, and that allows them optimum solution, so that any other therapies they come up with and also their forefront therapy is all covered by it, then those companies are going to be really hot property in the genomics market. Those shares will do really well. If the outcome of the analysis by the CEO leads them to the conclusion that they need to raise more funds, it can happen in two ways. Either they could dilute the equity, or they could go for mergers and acquisitions. So there will be many companies who might find it mutually beneficial to merge and pool their pipelines and pool their monetary resources and optimize the IP to spread over multiple pipeline candidates. So those kind of activities will also start to happen as we go closer to monetization. So the other thing I would also mention is that genomic companies that have multiple pipelines and multiple partners, like CRISPR, for example, it has got multiple partners. They will be in a much better position to avoid share dilution, and they will be in a much better position to optimize their IP for a wide range of therapies, because the cost burden is now going to be shared by their partners as well. So that's going to make the companies much stronger. So that brings me back to think about CRISPR Therapeutics, which is in such a position, and I think CRISPR Therapeutics will be doing better in this kind of a scenario. So I think genomic companies in general will remain volatile as we approach monetization. So now the question becomes, when is monetization? In my opinion, after having looked at the FDA process for approval of therapies, again, I have made a video on FDA approval process. I'll put a link in the description. You can go and have a look and familiarize yourself with the process. So there are various gates that you have to cross, and CRISPR Therapeutics as well as Beam have come in a much advanced stage, crossing many of the earlier gates where majority of therapies fail. So they are in a much better position. However, there are still risks ahead. It will be well advised for you to have a look at the IP video that I have made before. But having said all of that, I think that most likely the monetization may happen around 3 years from now. That is the earliest I can think of, and the outer range is 5 years. So these genomic companies will have to survive till then. CRISPR Therapeutics has got the money that is required to stay afloat up to that point of time. So we'll have to see more M&A action in this segment. And also don't forget, there are these big pharma companies which want to get into the cutting edge, and they would like to replenish their cell biology division with good quality IPs. And they will be on a purchasing spree, and they may pick up a few winners here and there, and a few stragglers here and there at a cheap price, put them together and make it viable to go for IPs. So one final note is that we should not forget Toolgen and Sigma are still in the battle, and we need to hear about them. And in my opinion, as long as the IP remains with the academic institutions, it's going to be good for the patients. But if the IP verdict doesn't stay within the academic domain, then it's going to be purely commercial and cutthroat, and it'll be like any other drug which comes into the market, and until the patent is becomes generic, there is going to be high pricing and low utilization and higher profits. So from a patient perspective, it should remain with the academic institutions. From a shareholder perspective, if I was a shareholder of Toolgen or Sigma, I would like to see them get the IP and make the most out of it. So ultimately, it all comes down to corporate social responsibility and ethics in business. So ethical corporation, even if it wins IP, will try to find a win-win solution where the patients also win, and there's a good amount of profits for the shareholders, and they can balance their accountability to the shareholder with their accountability to the society and balance their responsibility. So that's where I would like to end this session. And the question now is, what do you think about it? And as I always, I'm requesting you guys to put your opinion in the comments. Let's have a discussion. It will make this channel much more beneficial for all of us. And if you like this video, please put a like out there. And if you have not yet subscribed, why not? It's absolutely free. Just press the subscribe button. It's very easy. And become a member or a subscriber of this channel and help us grow this channel. Thanks and have a great day and a wonderful weekend. See you tomorrow. Bye for now.